Well, Jasmine, thank you so much for inviting me to share some of my trajectory, my professional trajectory, which I guess is part of it's connected to our personal trajectory as well, right? As you all know, I am a professor here at the Heller School. I am an associate professor of the practice, and I also direct the Master's in Public Policy program. And I am also a graduate of the Heller School. As I think most of you know, I finished my PhD in 2007 here at the Heller School. So I thought I would talk about three, I don't know if to call them threads or waves, perhaps, that have affected my professional trajectory. The first one is my migration story, and I'm not going to tell you the whole history, but just a snippet. So in the summer of 1967, my parents went to the U.S. consulate in Madrid, Spain, to get a tourist visa or business visa because my father had an exhibition of his artwork at the Smithsonian. And my mom, who was his agent, in addition to being an extraordinary poet and theologian, she was also, as wives often had to do in the 50s and 60s and 70s, is work for their husbands. She sold his paintings, and so she brought all of his kind of scrapbook with newspaper articles and lots of information about all the exhibitions he had done to make sure that they could get the visa. And they showed the consular officer his bio and all of his exhibitions. And the consular officer said, "Oh, wow, you're a great artist. Would you guys like a green card?" And my parents shrugged their shoulders and said, "Sure, why not?" And they entered the United States and then were able to get their green cards very quickly. And I tell that story because it is an anomaly for what most immigrants experience in the United States. It's really hard to get a green card, to get permanent residency in the United States. But because of the fact that my parents were in Europe, even though they had been born in Colombia, but they were living in Europe, they were immigrants in Europe, in Spain, because the United States was, after World War II, actively recruiting people of scientific or cultural importance to the United States. My parents had this privilege that is a very rare privilege. And so part of my story is a story of privilege. And I think that is true for many of us, right? We have both privilege and oppression in our story, in our personal trajectory. So that shaped my initial understanding of immigration. Then we arrived in the United States, and my parents, a painter and a poet, wanted to live by their art. And so we were really poor because it is hard to live by your art. We always lived in one-bedroom apartments. My brother and I shared the bedroom, and my parents lived in a pull-out couch. I arrived in the United States in kindergarten. From kindergarten through 12th grade, I went to 9 different school systems. They were always moving. They were always looking for work. Twice we were homeless. Friends took us in. One time Irish American family in Brooklyn, another time Colombian immigrants in Connecticut took us in. So it was financially economically a really hard life. I never had health insurance until I went to college. And so the experience of economic struggle that many immigrants in the United States face is part of my story and shapes probably everything I do and how I think. I think always in terms of class, and I think about workers, low-wage workers. It's the thing that moves me the most, the economic struggle of people. And so my immigration story has both, right, privilege and exploitation. And lastly, the last kind of wave or thread is faith. My parents were very religious. They were very, well, let me say faithful. They didn't always go to church, but they were very faithful. They were Christians, and they believed in their faith was what drove them and gave them strength. I think they survived because of their faith, but also they had a faith that was very political. My mother was a theologian, and she was very interested in Latin American liberation theology. And so it's a Christian theology about liberation, about addressing economic exploitation, political exploitation, genocide in the Americas. And it's even though they were Catholic, it was a movement that rebelled against the Catholic Church. And so their interpretation of so they were, taught me to be a Christian, but their interpretation of Christianity was a Jesus that was very radical, that was about a ministry of social justice. And so from my birth, I was indoctrinated into social justice, you might say. And so those three kind of threads, I think, led me to study undergraduate degree in theology and philosophy at a Jesuit university, which is a Catholic priests' university. And after I finished, the Jesuits run a national service program called JVC, the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. And so because of what I just told you, I decided I'm going to do a year of service and work in a inner city poor community, working on racial justice and economic justice. And because I spoke Spanish, I was applied and I got accepted to work as a paralegal at CARECEN, the Central American Refugee Center in Washington, D.C. And I'm not going to talk about every place I've worked, and I've worked with probably too many, but this one's important. So it was my first job out of college. And even though I was an immigrant, I knew squat about immigration. And it was during the war in El Salvador. And so what they did was political asylum litigation. And I was a paralegal for the only lawyer who didn't speak Spanish. The other lawyers spoke Spanish. And so I translated everything. And I learned political asylum. I learned immigration because I didn't know it. And I learned a few other things. I learned that legal remedies fall short. All you have to prove in an asylum claim is a well-founded fear of persecution. We had one woman Maria, who had been a victim of torture. We sent her to an INS approved physician who made a medical report saying that she was a victim of torture, and she did not win asylum, even though she had more than a fear of persecution. So I decided I'm not going to be an immigration attorney. And I also thought, legal remedies are important, but they fall short. At the same time, this organization, which was run by the people affected by the war, it was a Salvadoran-run organization. The ED was Salvadoran. The lawyers were not, but everybody else in the organization. And they did a lot of community organizing, political organizing. And even at lunchtime, 3 or 4 times a week, they would round us up at lunchtime and we'd walk about half an hour down to the Salvadoran embassy and protest the war in El Salvador. And they would organize our clients to testify in Congress, to protest, to do protests in downtown DC. And over time, we were able to stop the war. We got not perfect remedy, but temporary protected status, TPS, which Salvadorans still have now. And so the other lesson for me was that I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing community organizing and being led by people most affected by an issue. And so that is an operating principle that was established very early on. And I don't know if I could have articulated it so clearly. Now I am able to articulate it, but I had that kind of drive within me to seek places where oppressed people could step into their power. Women have trajectories that are often affected by their partners, especially if the partner is male. and you're in a marriage, and so oftentimes that affects it. And so at that point, my trajectory took a little bit of a side trip. I married a man who was a teacher, a high school teacher, and his area of study was Soviet history and Marxist thought and Russian literature. And so we moved to the Soviet Union, and we taught English there, and I learned a lot. It was when the Soviet Union fell, so I lived in the Soviet Union during that time. And we also, a couple of years later, a year later, we went to teach in China. And so those things have informed me a lot right now in terms of what I see happening politically, because when you live in a totalitarian state, and I was born in Spain under a dictatorship, so I have these three experiences of living in totalitarianism, and so that has influenced the way I see where our nation is going. When I came back, I think I kind of once again started on the path, and I brought together my love of teaching. So I had really good experiences teaching. It was very different experiences, but once I enjoyed it, I realized, wow, like I can teach. Like I didn't know I had that ability. But I also had still a passion for immigration justice. So I started working at an organization called the Adult Learning Center. It was a large organization, and we ran programs on economic and political empowerment for poor rural women in New Hampshire, and also immigrants in southern New Hampshire. And that led me to want to study for a doctorate. I had been working for about 13 years when I came to Heller. And after Heller, the experience at Heller solidified my desire to teach, because I got to teach while I was at Heller, in addition to having taught a bit. And also, I focused on immigration policy. And when I finished, I had a few really hard years, because it was really hard. Not a few, like for like 3 or 4 years, I tried to get a teaching position in a university, and it's very hard, and I couldn't move. I had small children, like, so I couldn't move in, so it became very difficult, and it was very like, I guess I got depressed. Yeah, a period of depression, because I invested all this time in a PhD, and then I couldn't do what I wanted. And I started working at immigrant serving nonprofits, the Irish Immigration Center, MIRA, different ones in the Boston area. And in all of those places, I kept adding to my skill set. And so in retrospect, I am grateful for those, because they were good learning experiences, even though they weren't exactly what I wanted to do. And then right before coming here full-time 2 years ago, the previous 10 years, I worked at a racial justice organization as the ED. And I almost didn't get the job, because someone who was very powerful and connected to the organization, kind of an advisor to the organization, had written them a letter, which accidentally I was copied on, that said that I wasn't qualified to be an executive director. But the board did not listen, and I got the position. And then I was able, because I was I had the top leadership position, to experiment with democratic participatory management structures, with life-giving restorative human services policies, and also be very radical about our work, our abolitionist work and police accountability work, as well as continuing to do immigration organizing. And then I started, Janet Bogoslav reached out and asked me to teach part-time at Heller, and I did. And thank you, Janet. And I been teaching here part-time for about 7 years. And then 2 years ago, I came on full-time, and it feels very good to be here, and also a bit scary, because the academy is under threat, and it's a difficult time to be here. But all of my students make it worthwhile, and my colleagues like Jasmine make it worthwhile. So I will stop there. Yeah, maybe questions. I'm not sure how you want to proceed, Jasmine. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you for the inspirational taking us on your what has ended up being a very inspirational journey. So I appreciate it, and I'm sure you're seeing on the in the chat that other people do as well. So typically what we do during this time is allow students to ask questions. And so I wanted to yield that time to folks to ask Alexandra questions.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, Professor. It is wonderful to meet you. I will confess that the reason why I joined this conversation is because I graduated from the Heller School as well, from a master's this past May. And I'm looking into the possibility of joining the PhD in social policy at Heller as well. And I was very inspired by your work. I've been trying to read a little bit about you, and that definitely led me here. I think it's amazing to hear your own words and your own truth telling your story. In a sense, I'm an immigrant as well because I'm from El Salvador. So it was actually interesting to see you working with our people. I know that our people tend to migrate a lot. I guess the question that I actually have is more related to that is experience that I want to have, or like advices you could give me. Quite honestly, one of the big reasons why I want to join a PhD is because in my country, since 2006, we've had maybe 12 to 1300 uh, people registered as researchers. There's not a lot of research happening right now, and that has led to a lot of fake news and people who believe in a lot of things. Whoever can say whatever, and we all take it as a truth. Academia is really not respected. And as I come from that context, I found myself with the opportunity of studying, and that is something that I would love to pursue as well. So I guess I would like to hear a little bit of, like, maybe in your experience, what could potentially work, knowing that I'm also Latin American and I'm trying to study further. And I resonated a lot with what you said. Like, I got a little depressed when I couldn't do what I wanted to do because I want to work, for example, more with women's rights kind of thing, but it's not necessarily like where life takes me all the time. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, it's very nice to meet you, Beatriz. Yeah, I feel that my relationship with the Salvadoran community in Washington, D.C., and then later in Boston, like with Centro Presente and a number of people who are Salvadoran who founded that organization. So I have a long history. So I would be happy to sit down with you and explore the PhD program one-on-one. I think that if you are interested in research and if you're interested in teaching also, but certainly research, then a PhD is a good idea. And you're young. I think that there's an opportunity cost here, right? While you're studying, there are things like we just recently, 7 years ago, bought our first house because we couldn't afford to buy a house because my husband and I, my second husband and I, were doctoral students for a long time. So there's a loss of income. There's and I see some doctoral students on the call. So you well know there's some opportunity costs. But if you're young, I think it's a very valuable investment, especially if you are interested in generating knowledge. And I think that it sounds like in El Salvador, there's a need for women academics and for changing the culture of of how people are how academics are perceived. I would suggest that you look at several. I mean, hopefully you'll apply to Heller, but to look around to see what the best, like if I say, don't put all your eggs in one basket. I have a colleague. I'm part of a writing group of academics and mostly historians, but not only. It was started by historians at the beginning of COVID. And there's one person who is Salvadoreña. She has a PhD in history, and she does research on the coffee industry. And she she lives in Vienna in Austria. But I actually did get to meet her last summer because I happened to be there, but usually I just talk to her on Zoom. But I'm happy to connect you because she has a network of Salvadoran. She's working with other Salvadoran women who have their doctorates. I think you would love to meet her. She's very lovely and very smart. I don't know if tell me more about your question. I'm not sure I've answered your question.
Honestly, it's just a very broad way of getting to know you. I felt like, oh, it's got to be a little like awkward or random, but
Yeah.
quite honestly, these type of meetings are usually when I have had the opportunity of meeting like the most interesting people I've met at the university. I would randomly go to a talk and start talking. So I really appreciate it. I guess if we can have a one-on-one meeting, that would be amazing. And you did answer my question, by the way.
Okay. And I know that Emily and Fernanda are doctoral students. Do you have any words of wisdom for Beatriz, Emily or Fernanda?
I'm happy to go. Sorry, Fernanda. I have a 1 o'clock meeting that I have to run to. But Beatrice, I did DM you my information in case you want to talk. I'm always happy to connect. But I agree with what Dr. Pineros Shields is saying about just evaluating the costs, applying to different programs. I think that, and I'm definitely happy to talk more at more length, but I think there's a lot of things that I realize about academia now that I've been in it for a little bit longer. And I don't necessarily trend on the side of saying, don't go into it, because I think some people have kind of written it off, and there's very valid reasons why. I think it can be a really good way to open more doors. But I also think that it's not the end all be all either. So I think if you can evaluate like what you want it to be and how you want to have your experience really help what you hope to do, then that's a decision that you can make for yourself. So whatever the reasoning is fine. Like, you don't have to have, some people, I've heard like plenty of people be like, don't go unless it's funded, which I do think is good advice, but like people have a lot of opinions about this, right? But I think as long as it makes sense to you and what you want to use it for and your kind of your story, then I'm always encouraging people to do it, because you learn, I think the biggest thing you learn is like your network opens a little bit more. You learn a lot of different skills, and I think that can be very valuable. And I think that you can try and figure out a way to do it in a way that you want to, not an existing way maybe that has been done before, so you can push a needle a little bit. But yeah, I'm happy to talk more. And Fernanda, if you have anything you want to add, I'm gonna head out.
Thank you, Emily. Fernanda, I'm sorry, I thought you were somebody else. I have a doctoral student who's named Fernanda, and I thought that you were her, but it's
okay. Yeah, no problem.
Beatriz, one last thing, I think, just piggybacking on what Emily has said, is that a PhD will certainly enable you to become a professor. But if you don't want to become a professor and just want to be a researcher, it also it trains you to be a researcher. And there are a lot of institutes that are not, a university setting where they hire PhDs to do research. I don't know the landscape in El Salvador or in Latin America or Central America, but at least in the United States, there are research institutes where you don't teach, but you're just doing research. And I think my friend in Vienna, that's the place. She's not working in a university. She's working in an institute, a research institute.
Gracias.
But nada.
Thank you, Lisa. Miriam, so so you've attracted alumni. Because I think Lisa, you're an alum, right? And Miriam's an alum. Beatrice is an alum. Which is wonderful. Oh, Fernanda, you're also an alum. So I think, you know, there's something that you're looking for as alum. And I'm really curious. I have a sense of what Beatrice was looking for. But Lisa, Miriam, Fernanda, I would love to hear your hopes for this sort of engagement as alum.
I would say for me, I always just jump at the opportunity to hear Alexandra speak, and we've connected recently. So I wouldn't say there's anything specific that I come with in terms of questions.
Right.
But as I've said in the chat, I really enjoy Alexandra's storytelling capabilities, and with this new transition that you've done at Heller, Alexandra, just really excited to continue to hear from you.
Thank you, Miriam.
I actually have a question related to that. So I would love to hear a little bit about your transition from just faculty to faculty with a very specific administrative role. What has that transition been like? And what sort of learnings do you have from it? Because I think a number of Heller students, graduates, alum are planning to have careers that touch in multiple different places. And I feel like you're a wonderful example of that, not just your current transition. Also, you talked about your transition from an ED role, but what do you think makes you capable of doing that?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I'm starting to reflect on it, but I'm still in that initial transition phase. So I hopefully will develop better analysis over time. But I wanted to say that first, I'm very grateful to Dean Madison for inviting me into this role. I admire her ability to see the potential in people. And so I'm grateful that she saw that in me. What's unusual, I suppose, is that, excuse me, I need to let my dog out. I'm sorry, one moment.
Say, this is life.
Yes, this is life. Oftentimes in the academy, we have people moving into kind of administrative positions from being faculty for extended periods of time. And while I've been here for 8 years almost, it has been mostly in adjunct capacity. So that's unusual. So that is why I think that Maria's kind of, I guess, taking a chance on me. And I think I'm grateful for the women that took chances on me throughout my career. And I want to be that woman also, to take chances on people. When you can, to see their potential, to see their skill. So that's one thought. The other thought is that the academy continues to be a pillar of white supremacy, right? It is a Eurocentric imperial project. It's a male, it's patriarchal project of medieval Europe, and where doctoral studies started. And it is and because it is imperial and because it is patriarchal and racialized, it is hierarchical. And we are in a moment in which across the nation, higher education is under threat. We are seeing demographic shifts, but also we are seeing a concerted effort that is not just recent, that has, maybe it's intensifying, but there has been an anti-intellectual agenda that has targeted the university, and in particular universities that allow freedom of thought. Not only progressive thought, but just freedom of thought. And so in order to survive that war that is being waged, we need to think in new ways. And so perhaps because I have not been fully kind of formed in my professional trajectory in the university, I tend to, so I think it's just a matter of circumstance. It's not that I'm, I have more skill or anything, but a matter of how I was shaped. And in particular, my positions of management positions in previous organizations in which I experimented a lot with horizontal, kind of very participatory power sharing structures that I think right now, in order to address the challenges that the Heller School is experiencing in terms of low enrollment and other pressures from the university at large, that I think I am well placed because I'm not, I bring new ideas, like I bring new experiences. And one of the things that I've just finished doing is having one-to-ones with every faculty that I actually need one more, schedules haven't worked, that teach in the program, to rethink how we can, what is it exactly that we want people to leave the MPP with, and how do we get there? So really kind of asking some fundamental questions. And my task for today and tomorrow is to reach out to all the students in the program, to set up some focus groups, maybe do some question formulation technique, and those of you who have been my student will know what that means, around this challenge. And I know that I've already reached out to some alum to also give me feedback. So to answer your question, I think I am well placed, because when you have the types of problems we are facing now, you need a diverse set of thinkers. You need kind of democratic decision-making processes. They will yield innovation. It's not the only way to go, but when you want innovative thinking, you need hierarchical structure does not lead to innovative thinking. Maybe I should have said that at the very beginning. There it is.
And
know.
I think,
Yeah, I don't know if
Yeah.
that makes sense. I don't know what you think, Jasmine.
I concur, and I think that Maria or Dean Madison is another example of that.
Right.
And I think that's how she can see differently. And I think she's unwilling to engage the detractors, which I respect as well. So I don't want to monopolize, and I want to make sure that folks have an opportunity to ask questions. So Fernanda, Lisa, if you had any questions.
Yeah, hi. Again, thank you so much for having this conversation. One of the reasons I joined today was because I was curious just to learn more about how you got started in the field. As most of us are recent alum, I have found that a lot of us from our cohort have had struggles finding jobs coming, having graduated. And so I guess I'm curious if you can give us just some advice, especially as someone, how you mentioned you faced some struggles also with, being CC'd in that email and things like that. Just what you would advise us to kind of maybe do differently. I think we've all heard the whole network and, apply to jobs even if you're not qualified, but just anything else. If you had any other advice to give, that would be great.
Yeah, Fernanda, I'm sorry, it's been a challenge. It's we have a tendency to kind of internalize that it's something about us, that we're not matching up, or that we are at fault somehow, not good enough, any of that type of talk in our heads. And it's really hard not to take it personally, right? Because you're applying, it's like saying no to you. But in reality, it is a structure. These are structural dynamics, and it really is not about you. So I think that's the first thing I would say to you. I know it's hard, but don't take it personally. So that's, and I know people said that to me while I was looking, and it was hard to absorb, but I think the more you hear it, the better. So that's the first thing I'd say to any of you that are searching for a job. And in fact, some countries do it differently, actually. There's some dissertations about this topic. Second thing I would say is, I had, I'm not independent. I wasn't independently wealthy. So I had to take work that was at least at some level interesting. Some of the jobs that I took that it really wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to find a full-time teaching position. But I also cared deeply about immigrants. I mean, my dissertation was about immigrant organizing and immigration policy. So I took jobs working in nonprofits that were working with immigrants, and they weren't exactly what I wanted to do, but at least I was working with the population. I didn't really want to be an administrator, but that's what it was. I was like mid-level management in numerous cases. And in another case, it was also an immigrant nonprofit, and it was about a topic that I had done my dissertation on, immigrant organizing. And so I'd rather be a teacher, but it was connected. So both in terms of population, in terms of subject matter, and in those two terms, it was connected. And so it was valuable because it increased my skill in those areas. And being a manager was not a skill I was looking for, but it is a good skill to have. And in fact, here we are, almost 13 years later, and now I was asked to be an administrator. Part of the reason why Dean Madison asked me was not only that I could bring in some fresh thinking, but also I have been an administrator. I've been an ED, and before that and the reason why I became an ED is because I was a manager before, mid-level manager in several organizations. And so I think that one thing I could say is that even if you're not finding the exact what you want, find jobs that will build your skill in some way. Try to kind of isolate the components of a job that you see that you might be eligible for, right? That you apply for, and see, like, could these be building blocks? Or maybe bricks, maybe if it's a road, maybe the metaphor is better. Could these be bricks on the road that I want to build the road that will get me to my destination. So it's compromise, but it's compromise in the right direction, right? Leading you in the right direction. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, that is helpful. Thank you. I guess maybe just a follow-up question with that, because one thing I think at least people I've spoken with have kind of like struggled with that of, yeah, maybe taking a position that it maybe does build up on some skills, but if it's unpaid or if it's very low pay, at what point do we say, okay, I have a master's degree, I also need to have an income? And kind of like what you mentioned earlier, like you and your husband had PhDs and only recently purchased a house because you're students for so long. And so I feel like sometimes with getting into a field where we're expected to either take low income or low wage jobs, or or volunteer for free just to build skills, I guess at what point do you say that you have to pursue or yeah, I guess pursue opportunities that are going to be a little more financially rewarding? Or sometimes I think that can be a difficult thing for at least me and some other friends I've spoken to, where we feel like we might be expected to do this, but that wouldn't necessarily happen in other fields. So any comment on that or thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think the volunteer work, I mean, I did 2 years of service in this national service. So it's not that I'm against volunteering, but after you finish your program, I mean, the reality is that you need to move forward. And so I would hesitate to volunteer. Like, that just seems, and it sounds like it feels a bit humiliating. So yeah, I think that you should, I like using this word life-giving. I think you should seek choices that are life-giving. They may not be exactly what you want, but at least they're life-giving. And if the volunteering is not life-giving, because oftentimes organizations will exploit volunteers. So I would be very careful with that. So in terms of finding a job or accepting a job that pays less than optimal, part of what's challenging is finding jobs in this area because it's so expensive to live here. And the rest of the nation is, many places in the nation are not so expensive to live as here. And so that's another thing, is maybe to broaden your geography. But I know that I took jobs that did not pay as much as I had a PhD, and I felt like I should be getting paid more than I was. And that was really hard. That was really hard. And one of the things that I learned over time was to know my value. To know my value. And so, one last thing. I often took a job, but I kept doing a job search. Like, I was like, okay, I'm taking this job, and I continued to do a job search. One of Jasmine's predecessors told me that. Actually, but before he was your predecessor, he was one of my classmates. It's like the first day of your job should be the first day you start a job should be the first day of your new job search, in terms of building connections that are going to serve you for your next job, kind of sketching out what it is I want to do next. And so that's reality is you have to pay the rent, so you take a job, but that doesn't mean that you might not continue searching. So
thank you so much.
you're welcome.
I affirm everything that she said. Beatrice, I noticed that you were also engaging in the conversation, even on chat. And Lisa, who was not able to ask any questions because she was in a loud cafe, said that she joined today because she was looking to talk about myself and the skills that she'd learned at Heller. So, and she wanted to thank you for sharing in this session. So, and I believe that Lisa was a MBA student, if I'm not mistaken. So, well, this has been wonderful. Does anyone want to have the last word or the last question?
Maybe only to thank you both for putting this together. I feel like it's always nice to have these kind of opportunities to just talk about what's life after the master's, I guess. And I think it's lovely when I see other people like planning for their things too. I definitely find you very inspiring, professor. So I will email you because I'm shameless.
Yes. No, it's fine. I'll put my address in the chat.
I really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, there
Well,
you
thank
go.
you. Thank you for joining. You make it worth it. You make all this worth it. So thank you and have a wonderful rest of the day. And thank you very much, Professor. I appreciate you. And I look forward to sharing this with others.
Thank you so much, Jasmine.
You.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.